Alright, so you've made it to Module 6, talking about Model Performance Indicators, which we'll call MPIs from here on. This is really the heart of the WIDA standards. It's really taking all the information that we've learned about up to this point, and then we're trying to put it into practice in an actual setting within our classrooms for the actual students we teach and the actual topics and lessons that we're teaching. It's very important for us to internalize this process of understanding and creating MPIs and know the purpose behind it. So let's start off with a couple of questions. Here's some key questions about these MPIs. First off, what are they? And what makes up an MPI? Why are they important to us? How do teachers use them in the classroom? And how do teachers create MPIs for their students? So as we go through this module, we'll be learning the answers to each of these questions. Okay, so if we look back to the funnel, we've already talked through the features of academic language, from the ideas of discourse level, sentence level, and word phrase level, and all the different aspects of those issues. We talked about performance definitions in the last heady module, considering things also focused on student levels and other issues that we added on to things like the can-do descriptors. And now we're actually at the bottom of the funnel, taking it all and putting it into practice in the classroom, talking about the standards matrix. And inside the standards matrix is where we find the MPIs. We looked at an example of two standard matrices in the last module. One was a standard and one was an expanded matrix. So what are these MPIs? WIDA Standards Framework shows examples of how the language is processed or produced within a particular context using MPIs. It's meant to be an example and not a fixed guideline of the language with which students may engage during instruction and assessment. The 2007 standards and the 2012 standards Amplification both provide lots of good examples at different grade bands in different domains and different subject matters and different topics for these MPIs, but it's not an exhaustive list because really it could never be an exhaustive list based on all the different aspects of the grades and content areas and domains that are out there. The book would be way too big. So we're talking about examples to really help you get the mindset of how to create these objectives through the MPI framework. Because we really do see MPIs as very similar to objectives. They're carefully crafted in order to include a couple of key components. But before we talk about the components of an MPI, let's do a quick review of some language. If you remember back to Module 3, we talked about differentiation. So it's very important for us to remember that the focus of the MPI process here is on differentiating for our students and helping them with what they can do while moving them forward into higher levels of academic and linguistic challenges. We want to create MPIs and MPI strands, which are linked together in one area. In your content area, it's very important for us to do this, but you're not expected to do it for every single day, for every single student, for every single language domain that you expect your student to be working on in that day. It would be impossible. Really, we want you to realize that we're trying to focus your attention on the process. We wanted this process to become an internalized one within yourself as you get more practice with MPIs and writing language objectives for ESL students. And again, we want to remind you that we feel like this will actually help your instruction with any struggling learner, or actually any student, considering that we're all teachers of academic language. So if you look at the chart of how the 2007 standard matrix is set up, you'll notice that an MPI is basically each box found on this chart. And a strand is the collection of 5 MPIs running from level 1 to level 5. The content of each of the little boxes here is not important for us now. Just wanting you to see that on this grade level of 6-8, in the ELP strand of social and instructional language, this is the summative framework, just to give us a picture of how it looks. The 4 domains running down the page on the left, the 5 levels running across the top, and again, an MPI is each box, and then 5 boxes in a line together make up a strand. So that'll be some terminology we'll be using throughout the course of this module. So here's another example, but this one is from the 2012 expanded standards. Here we have ELD Standard 4 being taught, the language of science, in grade 8, and the example topic is the forms of energy. Our cognitive function, which we don't lessen based on the student's proficiency level, is to analyze energy transfer. And notice that our domain is speaking, but at each of the levels, what we are modifying is the language objective. And here the MPI, in the first box, it says, state how energy transfers using visual supports. So we're going to be wanting students to create probably very short sentences using some pictures we've given them to talk about heat or light or sound, which are different forms of energy transfer. And as we move up the strand in difficulty from level 1 to 5, we might see that level 5 we really want students now to discuss how energy transfers using graphic supports. So we want them to have a higher level of understanding in the abilities linguistically, but cognitively we want to keep the same abilities across the strand. To review again quickly, our 4 language domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And in each of these domains, we got a couple of examples here of things that a student can do cognitively that might be some key terms you could use in writing an MPI. For listening, processing, understanding, interpreting, evaluating spoken language in a variety of situations. For speaking, it could be engaging in oral communication in a variety of situations for a variety of purposes and audiences. Reading, processing, understanding, interpreting, and evaluating written language, symbols, and text with understanding and fluency. And writing could be to engage in written communication in a variety of situations for a variety of purposes and audiences. You'll notice across the 4 domains there was very similar language for speaking and writing, because both of those are productive language, where the student is producing language, whereas the reading and listening were also very similar in the sense that they are receptive language. So these are just some key terms that we're going to continue to use as we talk about the MPIs and the WIDA standards framework. Okay, so each MPI, as we talked about, is one of the boxes on those charts we've looked at. We haven't noticed it subtly yet, but we're going to go into it now because each MPI actually holds 3 key elements and always in the same order. The first is the language function, the second is the content stem or the example topic from the lesson, and the third thing is the supports. Okay, so trying to define each of the elements of an MPI, the first off is always the language function, and this is going to describe, usually using action verbs, how the student uses language to demonstrate proficiency. Using the Bloom's words are an excellent place to start in determining the language functions. The content stem and example topics are often specified by our content standards, whether it's the state or national standards or whatever topic we're discussing at the time. We usually take some language from the standards and apply it to the MPI. And finally, the support will finish the MPI sentence. This is the 3 categories of sensory, graphic, or interactive resources that are embedded into the instruction we provide and also into the assessment that's going to help the student to be able to construct the meaning they need in both the language and the content. Okay, so let's look at one MPI and look at the elements that are broken apart here in the right order by the colors. First it says, follow oral directions to design area maps using manipulatives and illustrated examples in small groups. Do you remember what the green portion was, following oral directions? That's our language function. Notice it's an action verb. Our second part, to design area maps, was our content stem, or the example topic. And then the third one, the purple, do you remember what that one was? That was our instructional supports, using manipulatives and illustrated examples in small groups. So how many supports are actually in this MPI? Manipulatives, illustrated examples, in small groups. So it's actually 3 supports all put into one sentence. So let's continue to delve into MPIs and into each section in a bit more detail. For language functions, this is always the beginning of our MPI sentence. For example, here it says describe. Notice it's an action verb. For language functions, WIDA says there's not really an exhaustive list, and they don't provide one, of all the different language functions because of course the world is full of different language functions. But Bloom's taxonomy is a great place to start. All the action verbs associated with Bloom's are a great place and a great resource to tap, and you'll find some examples of those on the course. back in the attachment section. Language functions are focused on how students share or show their content knowledge. And the 2007 and the 2012 resources show examples of different grade levels and different content areas of language functions that might be acceptable in those grades and in those areas. So here are a few columns of examples of different language functions, and notice that they are action verbs that can many times be found on the Bloom's taxonomy. Our example from the sample MPI we're looking at is on describing, so there it is in the first column. So returning to our sample MPI, we want to describe what? The objects of the earth or sky. So this is probably coming from a standard in some grade level, in some area of science most likely. And what we're doing here is taking our standard and simplifying it into the basics, just a little stem of what we're trying to focus on in that standard. So here is the objects of the earth or sky. I'm thinking about mountains, rivers, lakes perhaps, or things in the sky like, is given an example, the sun, the moon, and stars, things like that. And moving into our third part of the MPI, these are our supports or strategies that we're going to use to support the student in their learning of this topic and their production of this language function. So we have three things here: from observation, photographs, or models. So we're going to give students the chance to observe, the chance to look at photographs, and the chance to see some different models of things that might help them to describe objects of the earth and sky. There's many kinds of supports that we can give to students, and we break them up into three categories. Like we've talked about before, the first is sensory supports, talking about things they'll be able to take in with their five senses. Could be real-life objects, illustrations and diagrams, physical activities using kinesthetic means, or various things like making broadcasts or using models and figures and things like that. The second category are graphic supports. We've already talked a lot about graphic organizers, using tables and graphs, number lines, things like that. Can also be very helpful in helping students meet the MPIs. And the third category is interactive supports, working in pairs or small groups, using cooperative structures, allowing assistance by the internet or various software programs, allowing a student maybe to work with a buddy in their first language, or having some kind of mentor who comes from outside the class to help out, like a tutor. Focusing on some sensory supports, there's again many different categories based on the content that you're working with. The first column is for language arts, the second for math, the third for science, and the fourth for social studies. And of course, you probably had some experience using these already. Some of them are found in your textbook, some of them are found in resources you already use. So based on your content area, you'll probably find that some of the sensory supports are more helpful than others, just based on what you're teaching. Feel free to pause the recording for a moment to check out your content area. And here's a chart full of graphic organizer ideas that you might be able to use in each of the 5 ELP standards from the WIDA consortium. Just a quick review of that again. The first standard is social instructional language, the second is ELA, the third is math, the fourth is science, and the fifth is social studies. In each of those different avenues and areas, we're going to find that different sorts of diagrams will be more helpful. Venn diagrams, T-charts, cycles, cause and effect charts, and semantic webs. Could be very helpful, so feel free to pause the recording to check out things from your specific content area. So here's a final review of our MPI before we get to our assignments and activities for this module. You'll see again the 3 colors signifying each of the different components of an MPI. I'm going to read it out one more time and see if you can figure out which section is which. Follow oral directions to design area maps using manipulatives and illustrated examples in small groups. So the first section in green, what is that? The language function. The second section in blue, the content stem or example topic. And then finally in purple, the instructional support. I hope you got all 3 of those answers correct. If not, you want to go back and do a little review, because you're going to definitely need it for the assignments that we're going to be working on next. When we get together in our group activity face-to-face, we're going to actually create MPIs together using the 3 different components: language function, content topic, and instructional support. We're going to mix all up using post-it notes and have a fun activity that we'll explain later. No need to read all this now. but we'll hunt around putting different post-its together to make MPIs and seeing how they work. We'll spend some time discussing how they work and how they fit with different domains and subjects and grades, proficiency levels, and the kinds of supports we might need for a student at different levels. So again, we'll talk more about this when we get together, because this really is the most important aspect of the WIDA framework so far that you're really going to get the most use out of in your classrooms. So we're going to spend a lot of good time on this. We're going to spend time on a second activity as well, where we're going to sort some strands, taking specific MPIs and trying to rank them in order from level 1 up to level 5. And we'll do that together. But finally, your individual project. Notice we're giving you a lot of time for the individual assignment, over 2 hours, because we want you to really internalize this idea of writing MPIs, these objective sorts of things for your students in the classroom that you are actually working in with them. We're going to spend some time understanding the assignment for this module after we get together. So please don't try to complete this module until after our face-to-face meeting, because it'll give us some more time to process and think through the different parts of an MPI and how to write them and things like that. So, some helpful resources you might find after our face-to-face time, and as you're getting ready for your individual assignment, here's a few things you can use to help you out. You might want to have an example of an MPI strand to remember the terminology. And here's actually a description of the components of the standards matrix. We've walked through these using an example, but here are all the different components defined as it goes through them. Feel free to pause the recording to check out this slide. Here's actually a blank template, which you will also find in the attachment section of the module back on the website. And it's going to tell you and show you a little bit more about each of the components. And this is what you're going to use for your actual assignment to create your MPIs using a blank template, sort of like this. And from the 2007 WIDA resources, you'll see a lot of sample topics and genres for each of the 5 standards that you might choose in helping you to write your MPI. Or you can even choose any MPI from any topic that you're working on around right now in your school year. Here's also, from the 2012 Standards Amplification, an appendix that has all the different indexes of strands and topics that are found within that book to give you some great examples to help you build off in your content area or your grade level, or for whatever sorts of domains you'd like to work on, to give you a lot of good examples. And if you need help getting to the actual 2012 amplification document, your instructor or your ESOL teacher at your school can help you find that. And if you want to work harder, not smarter, notice that on the WIDA.us website, under the Standards and Instruction tab, there is a click for English Language Development. So select that, and it will take you in to finding standards from the 2007 ELP standards, and it's got a lot of great resources on that website to help you out in understanding and writing MPIs. So once you click that search link on the WIDA website, you can actually search by grade level cluster, framework, ELD standard, different domains, and at various levels of proficiency in order to find some samples that might help you out to understand how to understand and to write MPIs in your content area. There's also an app for that. WIDA.us has got an app on the iTunes Store that's a great resource that can help you search by grade level or by domain or by standard in a really quick and easy way that's oftentimes much easier than flipping through a couple of text-style books to help you find examples of MPIs. So if you want to check that out, that'll be for bonus points.